In the heart of uptown Chicago, inside the glimmering walls of the Avalon Hotel, everything stops. The chatter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all gone. Forks freeze in midair. Laughter dies on painted lips. Even the pianist's hands hover above the keys, suspended in disbelief. Every gaze turns to table 9. There, a young waitress in a worn uniform kneels beside a little girl with cloudy eyes. The girl's face, moments ago twisted in confusion and fear, now glows as if touched by light for the first time. Her lips move gently. A sound, soft, fragile, then pure, fills the air. Together, the waitress and the blind child sing a song that doesn't belong to the expensive chandeliers or the golden plates. It's too honest for that. The melody rises, trembling and powerful, a hymn of something deeper than privilege, something real. The waitress's name tag reads Lena, the edges chipped from years of wear. Her hands are steady, tender as she guides the girl's trembling fingers to her throat so she can feel the vibrations. At the edge of the table stands Daniel Cole, a man whose last name lives on skyscrapers and bank towers. His suit costs more than most people's annual rent, but in this instant he feels smaller than he's ever been. His daughter Emma, only 8 years old, is singing again for the first time since her mother died. The restaurant breathes again when the final note fades, but nothing feels the same. Daniel doesn't know it yet. But this single moment, this song shared between a struggling waitress and his blind daughter, will destroy everything he thought he understood about control, success, and love. 6 months earlier, Daniel Cole's penthouse overlooked Lake Michigan, its walls lined with silent wealth. The curtains were always drawn, not to block out the city lights but to hide from them. Since Laura's funeral, Daniel had lived in the half-light of a man who couldn't move forward. The sound of morning sunlight used to mean laughter and piano keys. Now it only meant what was gone. The grand piano stood in the corner under a white sheet. His daughter, Emma, often stood beside it, tracing her small fingers along the keys she couldn't see. She remembered where her mother used to sit. Sometimes she whispered to the empty air as though music still lived there. "Dad?" Her voice echoed from the breakfast nook. She sat in front of a plate of untouched pancakes. Daniel looked up from his phone, distracted. "Yes, honey? Why don't we have music anymore?" His throat tightened. "We do, sweetheart. The radio, not that kind. Mommy's kind. The kind that feels alive." The words cut him like glass. He couldn't answer. He didn't know how. Instead, he reached for his coffee. "Finish your breakfast. Mrs. Turner will take you to therapy." Emma went quiet again, the kind of quiet that fills a house until it echoes. Across the city, in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, Lena Brooks scrubbed the counter of Joe's diner. The morning rush had come and gone, leaving the smell of bacon grease and exhaustion behind. Her hands ached, her feet throbbed, but her movements still carried a strange grace. "Mom, you're humming again," said her son Eli, from the corner booth. He was 12, smart and too observant for his age. Lena froze, catching herself mid-melody. "Was I?" He grinned. "Yeah, it's the song you used to sing when you played guitar." She smiled faintly, wiping her hands on a towel. Old habits. The guitar he mentioned leaned against the wall of their one-bedroom apartment covered in dust. Next to it, a cracked photo frame held a younger version of Lena, wearing a college cap and holding her music degree. Yale had once been her world. Dreams of singing on stage had filled her chest. But then Eli was born, his father disappeared, and reality began to eat dreams for breakfast. "Mom," Eli said again, glancing at her diploma, "you could still go back." "To Yale?" She laughed softly. "Baby, music doesn't pay rent. But you were good." His tone was serious now. "I saw that video of you on YouTube. You were really good." She smiled, brushing his hair back. That was another lifetime. She didn't tell him about the acceptance letter she still kept folded behind that diploma. The one that said she could rejoin her master's program if she could afford it. But dreams like that were luxuries. Groceries and asthma medication were not. As she counted her tips that morning, $36 and change, Lena decided to skip lunch again. Eli needed his inhaler refilled. By nightfall, she had changed uniforms twice. The morning diner, then a midtown cafe, and finally the Avalon, an upscale restaurant where the menu didn't show prices because anyone who needed to ask couldn't afford to eat there. She didn't know that tonight. She would kneel beside a little girl who couldn't see her, but would change her life forever. She didn't know that a man who owned half the city would look at her and see something money couldn't buy. She only knew the ache in her feet, the exhaustion in her bones, and the quiet hum of the song she used to believe could carry her anywhere. That night, Daniel wanted perfection. Emma's 8th birthday dinner had to feel special, maybe even normal. The Avalon was a place where reputation glittered, where every glass sparkled like a promise. But for Emma, the noise was too much. The laughter from nearby tables, the clinking of cutlery, the layered voices, it all collided into chaos. Her small hands pressed against her ears. Tears filled her clouded eyes. "Sweetheart, please," Daniel whispered. "It's just dinner." But she couldn't breathe. Her panic rose with every sound. The other guests began to notice. The billionaire and his blind daughter. The stares burned through him. Daniel reached for his wallet, ready to leave. That's when Lena stepped forward. She didn't think. She didn't ask. She just knelt down beside Emma and began to hum, a soft, low tone, gentle, steady, wrapping around the child like a blanket. Then she began to sing an old gospel tune, simple and healing. Emma's breathing slowed. Her hands dropped. Her head tilted toward the sound. Daniel watched as his daughter's face transformed from fear to wonder. And in that moment, surrounded by silence and strangers, Daniel Cole, the man who could buy anything, realized he was witnessing something priceless. When the last note faded, the entire restaurant stayed still. No applause, no whispers, just a stillness that felt sacred. Lena rose quietly, smoothed her apron, and walked away without looking back. Daniel sat frozen, unable to speak. Emma smiled faintly, whispering, "She sings like Mommy used to." And that was the first time Daniel realized what money had never been able to give his daughter. Connection. 3 days later, Daniel couldn't shake the sound of that song. It haunted him like sunlight through closed curtains. The world had gone back to its noise, but inside him, something quiet had shifted. He found her name from a credit card receipt, Lena Brooks, and within days, his assistant had a file on her. 34, no criminal record, 3 jobs, lives in a small apartment in South Chicago. Single mother. The facts made sense on paper, but nothing about her made sense to him. How could someone with so little make his daughter feel so much? He waited outside Joe's diner the next morning, his luxury car looking absurd beside the flickering neon sign. When Lena stepped outside after her shift, tying her apron around her waist again for the next job, he called out, "Ms. Brooks?" She turned, startled. "Do I know you?"
He hesitated.
"I'm Daniel Cole from the Avalon. Table 9. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Your daughter, Emma, is she okay?" "She's better," he said honestly. "Because of you," her expression softened. For a moment, he almost forgot why he'd come. Then he took a breath. "I want to hire you," her brows lifted. "For what?" "To help my daughter. To teach her music. To give her what I can't." Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes hardened. "You want to pay me to care for your child?" "That's not what I said. It's what it sounds like." Daniel's hand went instinctively to his wallet, his reflex for every problem. 5,000 a week. The number hung in the air like a test. He saw her flinch before she caught herself. 5,000 could change her life. It could buy medicine, food, time, but instead of yes, she said quietly, "You can't buy what your daughter needs." He stared, stunned. No one talked to him like that. Not in 30 years of building empires. "Everyone's for sale," he said automatically, his old armor of arrogance. Her laugh was bitter. "Then you've never met someone who's lost everything but still kept her soul?" She turned to leave, but he stepped forward. 10,000, he said, desperate now. She stopped. The wind caught her hair as she turned back, her face unreadable. "Mr. Cole, I'm not a price tag. And Emma doesn't need a hired musician. She needs a father who can hear her." She walked away, and Daniel stood frozen, the city roaring around him. Feeling, for the first time in his life, small. The fallout came faster than Lena expected. 2 days later, her manager at the Avalon called her into the office. There were complaints, he said, not meeting her eyes. "You abandoned your tables during service." "I helped a child who was crying," she said, trying to keep her voice even. He sighed, sliding an envelope toward her. 2 weeks severance. You know how this business works. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. By the end of the week, she had one less job and a mountain of bills. Then, as if fate wanted to press harder, Eli had another asthma attack. It happened at 2 a.m. The sound of his wheezing tore her from sleep. His face was pale, lips tinged blue. She fumbled for his inhaler, but the relief didn't last. The ambulance lights painted their tiny apartment red as it sped toward the hospital. She held his hand the whole way, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. At the ER, doctors spoke in terms she barely understood. Oxygen levels, inflammation, insurance codes. By morning, she was staring at a bill she couldn't pay. $15,000, maybe more. She sat beside his bed, listening to the hiss of the oxygen mask. He looked so small under the hospital blanket. Her mind raced through numbers, hours, shifts, but the math never worked. That's when she remembered the business card. It was still in her wallet, tucked behind old receipts. Daniel Cole, private line. Pride burned her throat, but love for her son burned hotter. She took out her phone and dialed. Miss Brooks? His voice was calm, surprised. I didn't think I'd hear from you. Your offer, she said quietly. Is it still available? It is. When can you start? She looked at Eli, breathing easier now. Tomorrow. But on my terms, he hesitated. I'm listening. 2 hours a day, public places only. Parks, museums. I'm not working in your house. You'll pay what you'd pay a normal instructor, no charity. He paused, maybe impressed. Agreed. And one more thing, she said. This isn't about you fixing your life with money. It's about a little girl who deserves her song back. There was silence. Then he said softly, tomorrow, 3 o'clock, Lincoln Park. When she hung up, she stared at the ceiling, unsure if she'd just saved her son or sold a piece of herself. The next afternoon, Daniel arrived early. His suit looked out of place among joggers and street musicians. He chose a bench by the lake, close enough for Emma to hear laughter and life, but far enough to feel safe. Lena arrived right on time, leading Emma by the hand. The girl's dark glasses caught sunlight and her smile was shy but real. Good afternoon, Mr. Cole, Lena said, her tone professional. Emma's excited. I want to sing where people can hear me, Emma said proudly. Miss Lena says music is meant to be shared. Daniel's chest tightened. His daughter hadn't spoken with that kind of joy in years. They started with breathing exercises, then a simple song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Lena borrowed a guitar from a busker nearby, and as she strummed, people began to slow down, listening. Emma's voice wavered at first, but Lena nodded encouragingly. Again, she said gently. Feel it, don't force it. By the second verse, Emma's voice rose clear and beautiful. Passers-by stopped. A young woman filmed on her phone. Daniel watched, half proud, half afraid. For the first time, he wasn't in control. That night, the video went viral. The caption read, Blind girl sings with her street music teacher. Billionaire father watches in tears. By dawn, it had 3 million views. The world had found them, and it wouldn't let go. By sunrise, Daniel's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages, emails, calls from numbers he didn't recognize. His assistant's voice trembled when she finally got through. Sir, you're trending on every platform. They're calling it the music miracle. He opened one of the clips, Emma's face glowing as she sang beside Lena. Strangers gathered around, clapping, crying. The comments were endless. Some called it beautiful. Others called it staged. Some said it was a publicity stunt. Others called Lena a saint. He turned off his phone. All he could hear was Emma's laughter in that park. But peace never lasts when the world is watching. By noon, journalists were camped outside his building. Reporters shouted questions about his daughter, his company, and the mysterious singing waitress. His board demanded statements. Investors whispered about distraction. And in the middle of it all, Emma asked, Can Miss Lena come sing again today? Daniel smiled weakly. Maybe later, sweetheart. Across town, Lena woke to chaos of her own. Her phone exploded with calls and texts, some kind, some cruel. A stranger offered her a record deal that wasn't real. Another asked how it felt to save a billionaire's soul. One message simply said, Stay away from him or you'll regret it. By evening, her diner boss asked her not to come back. It's too much attention, he said awkwardly. Customers are nervous. Cameras, you know. So she lost her last steady income all because she'd helped a child sing. When Daniel called that night, she almost didn't answer. "Did you know this would happen?" he demanded. His voice was low, controlled, the way men sound when they're about to break. "Know what?" she asked. "That this would go viral. That people would use my daughter's pain for clicks." "No," Lena said. "I didn't plan it. But maybe the world needed to hear her. She's 8 years old, Lena. She doesn't understand what's happening." "She understands joy," Lena shot back. "And she hasn't had that in a long time." There was silence, heavy and sharp. Then she added softly, "You hide her from the world because you're afraid it'll hurt her. But maybe she's strong enough to teach the world how to see." He hung up without replying, but her words stayed. They followed him through the night like echoes he couldn't silence. The next morning, photographers swarmed his building. News vans lined the block. Headlines blared, "Billionaire's blind daughter captures hearts." One outlet accused him of exploiting her for sympathy. Another painted him as a grieving hero. He felt trapped in a circus made from his own fear. At 8 o'clock sharp, the Sterling Enterprises boardroom filled with polished shoes and sharper smiles. Patricia Langford, the company's lead director, wasted no time. "Daniel, the stock's down 3 points. The merger partners are concerned about the attention. They want this handled." "Handled?" he repeated. "My daughter learned to sing again. That's not a scandal." "It's a distraction," another director said. "This emotional display undermines the brand's image." He looked around the table. 12 people who built their lives on his name, now pretending not to recognize him. "My brand," he said quietly, "was built to make the world better. Maybe I finally am." No one responded. That silence told him everything. Meanwhile, Lena's life began to crumble. Her landlord hinted that the cameras outside were bad for property reputation. Someone online found her address and posted it publicly. Her social media filled with insults, fake stories, and strangers demanding interviews. Then came the call from Eli's school. He'd been in a fight. A boy told him his mother was using some blind kid for fame. Eli broke the boy's nose. That night, Lena sat on their apartment floor, surrounded by unpaid bills and fear. She didn't cry. She couldn't. There was no time for it. When her phone rang again, she almost ignored it. But it was Emma's voice on the other end. "Miss Lena, Daddy says we can't sing anymore. But I don't understand why." "Did I do something wrong?" Lena's throat tightened. "No, baby. You did everything right. Then why does it feel like everything stopped again?" Lena didn't know how to answer. She promised she'd call soon even though she wasn't sure she could. The next day, Daniel made the call himself. "Lena," he said, his voice low, "we need to stop the lessons." For everyone's sake, there was no argument. Only her quiet reply. "I understand." He thought it would bring relief. Instead, it felt like cutting off his own oxygen. That afternoon, he took Emma to Lincoln Park anyway. Out of habit. She sat on their usual bench waiting. Her little hands rested on her lap, patient, hopeful. "Maybe she's late," she said after a while. Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. "Maybe," he said softly. Minutes stretched into an hour. The fountain's rhythm filled the silence between them. Finally, Emma stood. "She's not coming, is she?" He tried to speak, but the truth had no words. "I want to go home," she said. But instead of walking to the car, she turned toward the park center. "Emma!" He rose in panic. She walked faster, her cane tapping out a determined rhythm. "Emma, stop!" She stopped only when she reached the subway entrance. The crowd flowed around her like water around stone. Her voice was steady when she spoke. "I can find her. I know the train sound she talked about. She lives near the South Line." The fear hit him all at once. "You can't go alone." "Then come with me." The words stopped him cold. He saw his wife in her. The same bravery, the same stubborn faith that life could be more than fear. He reached for her hand. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's go." They descended into the echoing tunnels, leaving behind the safety of silence for the uncertainty of sound. And for the first time in 3 years, Daniel didn't lead. He followed. By nightfall, they found themselves outside a faded apartment complex above a corner store. Daniel hesitated before knocking. Lena opened the door in a sweatshirt, surprise written across her face. "Mr. Cole?" "Emma wanted to see you," he said. "So did I." Lena looked past him to Emma, whose smile said more than any apology could. Daniel took a breath. I was wrong. About everything. I thought protecting her meant hiding her. But I was only protecting myself, Lena nodded slowly. Then maybe it's time you both start listening again. That night they sat around a small kitchen table. Emma hummed softly as Lena strummed her old guitar. Daniel listened, the sound soaking through every wall he'd ever built. He didn't know it yet, but this was the night his life began again. The next morning the city woke to headlines that wouldn't stop multiplying. Every outlet had a version of the story, each one bending it differently. The billionaire's redemption arc, the waitress who healed a fortune, blind girl teaches her father to see. Daniel didn't leave his apartment all day. The world wanted statements, interviews, explanations. But what could he possibly say? That a stranger's song had done what years of therapy, business, and money couldn't? That he had been blind long before his daughter ever was? He sat by the piano that had gathered dust for 3 years. He lifted the cloth and pressed one key, then another. The sound was rusty and uneven, like an old memory trying to wake. He kept playing until Emma appeared beside him, her small hand resting on his sleeve. "Play the song Miss Lena taught me," she whispered. His fingers trembled, but he tried. He missed notes, stumbled through chords, and when he stopped, Emma filled the room with her voice. It wasn't polished. It wasn't perfect. It was beautiful. Lena arrived later that evening carrying grocery bags she could barely afford. She'd brought soup for Emma, thinking the girl might be tired after the subway adventure. When she saw Daniel at the piano, her steps faltered. He looked up at her, eyes tired but alive. "Stay," he said simply. That night, the three of them ate together for the first time. The conversation was awkward, soft, hesitant, but it was real. Emma told stories about her music therapy sessions. Lena laughed for the first time in days, and Daniel listened, not as a man who owned the world, but as a father who was finally part of it. 2 days later, Daniel stood on a stage for a press conference he hadn't planned to hold. 200 reporters filled the seats. Lights glared. Cameras flashed. He was supposed to read a statement written by his PR team. Words like image repair, public perception, and crisis management were written in neat corporate lines on the paper in front of him. He didn't read a single one. "My name is Daniel Cole," he said instead, voice echoing across the hall, "and I've been wrong for a long time." The crowd hushed. He took a breath. 3 years ago, when my wife died, I locked myself away. I called it protecting my daughter. But really, I was protecting myself from grief. I thought silence would keep us safe. He paused, his gaze landing on Lena and Emma sitting in the front row. Then someone reminded me that silence isn't safety. It's emptiness. Every click of a camera sounded like punctuation to his confession. He continued. "A waitress named Lena Brooks showed me that music isn't just sound. It's healing. It's truth, and it belongs to everyone, not just those who can afford pianos in penthouses." He swallowed hard. "That's why today I'm creating the Cole Foundation for Arts and Empathy, starting with $50 million to build music centers for children who've been told they don't belong in the spotlight." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Reporters shouted questions, but Daniel wasn't listening. He turned to the piano on the stage. He sat down, hands trembling, and began to play. It was Amazing Grace, the same melody Lena had sung in that restaurant months ago. His version was slower, rawer, but it carried something deeper than perfection. Halfway through, Lena rose and joined him with her voice. Then Emma stepped up beside her father and began to sing too, 3 voices blending, grief, faith, and innocence. When the song ended, the entire hall rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous. But what Daniel heard most clearly was his daughter's laughter cutting through it all. The next months blurred into transformation. The foundation's first center opened in a converted church in South Chicago. The sign above the door read, "The Emma House for Music and Light." Children from every corner of the city poured in, some blind, some living in shelters, some simply lost. Lena became the director, her guitar slung across her shoulder as she guided them through rhythm and voice. Daniel visited often, always quietly, never announcing who he was. He'd sit in the back and watch the chaos of kids learning to create sound. He'd never seen so much life in one room. Emma found her place too. She taught others how to feel music through touch, letting their fingers rest against her throat as she sang, just as Lena once taught her. The media called it a miracle. Daniel didn't argue, but not everyone celebrated. The corporate world he had built began to crumble beneath the weight of his new reputation. Investors withdrew. The board called for an emergency vote to remove him as CEO. Patricia Langford spoke first in the meeting. "Daniel, you're a philanthropist now, not a businessman. The shareholders need leadership focused on profit." He looked at her, calm and steady. "Then you should vote." They did. And by the end of the hour, he was out. He walked away without bitterness. He didn't need skyscrapers anymore. He had something greater. A daughter who could sing again and a purpose that finally made sense. Weeks later, Emma was invited to perform at Lincoln Hall for a charity concert. The crowd was massive. Journalists, families, students, people who had followed her story since that viral video. Lena stood beside her, nervous and proud. Daniel sat behind the piano, his suit traded for a simple sweater. When Emma began to sing, the room fell silent. Her small voice carried a weight that adults could only dream of, pure, fearless, radiant. As the final note hung in the air, the audience erupted. Daniel looked at Lena, her eyes glistening. "You did this," he said. She shook her head. "We did," he smiled faintly. "No, Emma did." After the concert, they stood outside under the city lights. Emma leaned against Lena's side, half asleep. Daniel watched them, the two people who had unknowingly rescued him from himself. "Lena," he said quietly, "I spent my whole life trying to control everything. Now I realize the best things that ever happened were the ones I never planned." She smiled, tired but warm. "Sometimes you just have to let the song lead." They stood in silence as the wind carried the distant hum of city life, the rhythm of cars, laughter, the echo of a child's song still lingering in the air. The world was noisy again, but this time Daniel didn't want to escape it. He had finally learned to listen. 2 years later, the sound of music spilled from places that used to echo with silence. The Cole Foundation had grown faster than anyone imagined. 20 community centers, then 50, stretching from Chicago to New Orleans, from Detroit to Denver. Each one a home for children who carried more pain than privilege, but had found healing in rhythm and song. Lena had become the heartbeat of it all. Her laugh filled every hallway. Her hands carried both grace and authority. She moved through each center like someone who had been born to build light out of brokenness. Every child she met seemed to see her not just as a teacher, but as living proof that hope could survive the hardest life. Eli was taller now, voice deepening, trumpet gleaming under the classroom lights. He led a small jazz ensemble of kids who had never touched instruments before this program existed. He practiced every night, his asthma finally controlled, his smile no longer shadowed by worry. Daniel's life looked nothing like it used to. The suits were gone. The boardrooms, the endless meetings, the hollow applause, gone too. He still had wealth, but it no longer defined him. Now his mornings began in a modest office above the First Music Center. He spent his days talking with teachers, approving budgets, and sometimes just listening to children sing. One spring afternoon, he visited the new center in Detroit. He arrived quietly, unnoticed at first. Inside, a little boy with hearing aids was pounding on a drum, eyes shut tight, feeling rhythm through vibration. A girl beside him clapped along out of time, both of them laughing uncontrollably. Daniel felt something swell in his chest. For the first time in his entire life, success made sense. Back in Chicago, the foundation prepared for its biggest event yet, a concert at Carnegie Hall. 150 children from every branch would perform together, joined by professional musicians who volunteered after hearing Emma's story. The hall had sold out within hours. The night before the performance, Lena stood by the old piano at the First Center, tracing its worn keys. Daniel joined her, coffee in hand. "Do you ever stop to think," he asked quietly, "that all of this started because you sang one song in a restaurant?" She smiled faintly. "It started because your daughter listened." He watched her for a moment. "You know, I thought music was a luxury. I used to measure everything in profits. Now I measure it in laughter, in second chances, in the number of kids who walk in here and believe for the first time that they matter." Lena met his eyes. "Then maybe you finally learned the language your daughter was born speaking." They stayed there a long while, listening to the faint hum of children rehearsing down the hall. The next evening, Carnegie Hall pulsed with energy. Rows of children lined the stage, different ages, colors, backgrounds, all united by the music they'd learned to call their own. The audience filled every seat, Journalists shoulder to shoulder with parents, donors, and strangers who had followed this story since the first viral video. Daniel sat at the piano again, Lena to his right, Emma standing at center stage in a silver dress that shimmered under the lights. She was 10 now, taller, more confident, her blindness no longer something that defined her, but something that deepened every note she sang. When the conductor raised his hand, silence fell like a held breath. Then the first notes began, gentle at first, then swelling with power as the children's voices joined. The song was Emma's own composition, written in Braille, titled Light I Can Hear. Her lyrics rose through the hall. I don't need eyes to see the sky. I touch it when I sing. The world is full of sound and soul, and that's where I begin. The words moved through the audience like a tide. By the final chorus, thousands were on their feet, clapping through tears. The sound became thunder, wave after wave of applause that refused to end. Lena looked at Daniel, and for once he didn't hold back emotion. His hands shook, tears falling freely, but his smile stayed steady. Emma bowed low. Her face lifted toward the crowd as though she could see them all through the sound alone. The world was hearing what he once tried to silence. After the concert, when the crowd had gone and the hall was quiet again, they stayed behind, the three of them. Emma ran her fingers along the piano keys and whispered, "It sounds happy tonight." Daniel chuckled softly. "That's because it finally has something worth saying." Lena sat on the edge of the stage beside him. "You realize she's going to change the world, right?" He nodded. "She already has." They didn't speak for a while. The air was filled with the ghost of the final note, still hanging somewhere above them. For once there was no pressure, no schedule, no expectation, just peace. "Do you ever think about what's next?" she asked quietly. Daniel smiled. "For once I don't need to. The music will tell us when it's time." 5 years passed. The Cole Foundation spread to every state. Thousands of children learned to read Braille music, to sing without fear, to find meaning in the spaces between notes. Emma became a symbol of courage, performing at schools, hospitals, and events where silence once lived. Her voice carried the same warmth her mother's once had, shaped by Lena's patience and Daniel's belief. Lena earned an honorary doctorate for her work in inclusive music education. She laughed when she received it, saying, "Funny, I used to think I failed my dream. Turns out I was just tuning my heart for the right song." Eli received a full scholarship to Berklee College of Music, his trumpet now the heartbeat of a young jazz band that bore his mother's name. Daniel wrote a book, Learning to Listen, about the journey from power to purpose. It became a bestseller not because of fame, but because the story reminded people that humanity still mattered more than money. On the anniversary of that first night, Daniel visited the park bench where it all began. The brass plaque gleamed in the morning light, where the music started. Emma and Lena. 2025. He sat there with his coffee, the same brand he'd once sipped in sterile boardrooms, now warm in his hands as the city stirred awake. Nearby, a young woman played guitar, her voice carrying faintly through the morning breeze. He smiled, dropping a folded bill into her open case. She looked up, surprised. "Thank you, sir." "No," he said gently. "Thank you for keeping the world singing." As he walked away, a familiar melody rose behind him, Amazing Grace, and he paused, eyes closed, listening. The song had started years ago in a fancy restaurant, sung by a tired waitress and a frightened child. Now it belonged to everyone, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to speak or to buy or to fix. Sometimes it's just to listen, and Daniel Cole had finally learned how.